In the world where billion-dollar deals are sealed in shadows and fake smiles dominate boardrooms, a young woman was thrown out of the company she built with her own hands. But they never imagined that the one thing they dismissed would become the key to collapse their entire $330 million empire in an instant. This is my story, how I went from being erased to holding the power to erase everything they thought they'd won. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34, I thought I had everything figured out. The morning Denver sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Neuralink Dynamics, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors. The familiar aroma of dark roast coffee from the executive lounge mixed with the subtle scent of leather chairs and ambition, a combination I'd grown to associate with success. I remember the sound of my heels clicking against that marble as I walked through the corridors I'd helped design. Each step echoed with purpose, a rhythm I'd perfected over the years. Born and raised in a modest suburban home in Columbus, Ohio, I was the daughter of a high school math teacher and a nurse. No trust funds, no family connections, just raw talent and an obsession with artificial intelligence that kept me coding through countless sleepless nights. Neuralink Dynamics wasn't just another tech startup. Nestled in Denver's booming tech district, we were pioneering AI applications in medical diagnostics, the kind of technology that could detect cancer cells before human eyes could see them, predict heart attacks weeks in advance, analyze brain patterns to identify early-stage Alzheimer's. This wasn't just code to me, it was hope, wrapped in algorithms and neural networks. The patents bearing my name weren't just legal documents, they were my children. Born from years of research, failed experiments, and breakthrough moments that came at 3 a.m. when the rest of the world slept. 7 core patents that formed the backbone of everything Neuralink could do. Without them, we were just another company with fancy offices and big dreams. But standing in that gleaming lobby, watching the young developers rush past with their laptops and energy drinks, I felt something I couldn't quite name. A disconnect, perhaps. Like I was watching a movie of my own life from the outside. The executive meetings had grown longer, the technical discussions shorter. Board members who couldn't distinguish between machine learning and deep learning were making decisions about our AI strategy. I'd pour myself coffee in the break room and catch fragments of conversation, whispers about valuations, exit strategies, acquisition rumors. The language of creation had been replaced by the language of commerce. The whiteboards that once held elegant algorithms now displayed revenue projections and market penetration strategies. The other executives would smile at me, those practiced corporate smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Emily, our technical genius, they'd say, as if the word technical somehow diminished the genius part. They'd pat me on the shoulder after presentations, thanking me for simplifying things for the investors, never realizing that simplification was the hardest part, making the complex accessible without losing its essence. In those early morning hours, when I'd arrive before anyone else, the office felt different, empty of pretense, full of possibility. I'd stand in my lab, surrounded by servers humming their electronic symphony, and remember why I started this. But as soon as the elevator chimed and the suits arrived, that feeling would evaporate like morning dew under the harsh fluorescent lights of corporate reality. I was successful by every metric that mattered to the world: equity, salary, recognition. Yet walking those halls, I felt like a stranger in the empire I'd built, speaking a language that fewer and fewer people seemed to understand. The excitement of our early days felt like a lifetime ago. I still remember the rush of our first breakthrough, watching our AI correctly identify malignant cells with 99.7% accuracy, outperforming seasoned pathologists. We celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups. Our small team of 12 huddled in a cramped office space that smelled of instant ramen and determination. Those were the days when every line of code mattered, when every algorithm improvement felt like conquering Everest. Then, Richard Hale arrived. The board introduced him as our new CEO with great fanfare, Harvard MBA, former VP at 2 successful exits, a rainmaker who could attract venture capital like moths to flame. He walked into our offices wearing a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His handshake firm and practiced, his smile calculated to inspire confidence. He knew nothing about neural networks or deep learning architectures, but he spoke fluently in the language of valuations and term sheets. "Emily," he said during our first one-on-one meeting, leaning back in the chair that used to be mine. "You're the backbone of this company, the technical visionary. But now we need to scale. And scaling requires a different kind of vision." I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to say. How do you scale innovation? How do you mass-produce breakthrough moments? But I kept quiet, playing the role of the cooperative technical founder. The changes started subtly. My weekly presentations to the board became monthly, then quarterly. Email chains about strategic decisions would somehow forget to include me, only for Richard to apologize later with that practiced sincerity of his. "Must have been a technical glitch," he'd say, and we'd both pretend to believe it. During meetings, Richard would interrupt my technical explanations with phrases like, "Let's keep this high level," or, "We don't need to get into the weeds." The weeds? That's what he called the intricate neural architectures I'd spent years perfecting. He'd summarize my work in buzzwords: leveraging AI, machine learning synergies, algorithmic advantages, stripping away all nuance and complexity until our technology sounded like every other startup's pitch deck. The new hires reflected his vision. Sales executives who'd never written a line of code, marketing directors who thought API was a type of beer, financial analysts who could calculate our burn rate to the penny but couldn't explain what our AI actually did. The technical team that had once been the heart of Neuralink was slowly being relegated to the basement. Literally, our labs were moved to make room for a client entertainment area. I watched him in board meetings, masterfully weaving narratives about market opportunities and competitive landscapes. He'd reference my patents as our IP portfolio, subtly shifting ownership from personal to collective, from Emily's innovations to company assets. The other board members hung on his every word, seduced by projections of 10x returns and billion-dollar valuations. "Emily's brilliant," he'd say to investors, that patronizing tone barely concealed. "But she's a scientist. She doesn't understand the business side." They'd nod knowingly, as if being a scientist was both a blessing and a curse, something to be managed rather than celebrated. Late one evening, I overheard him on a call in his office. "The technical founder? Yeah, she's still around. Useful for now, gives us credibility with the tech press. But between you and me, once we close Series C, we'll transition her to an advisory role. Can't have someone who doesn't understand business in the leadership team when we're ready to exit." My blood ran cold. Advisory role, the corporate euphemism for being pushed out of your own company. I stood frozen outside his door. My reflection caught in the polished brass nameplate that read, Chief Executive Officer. When had this stopped being about changing the world and become about exit strategies? The storm brewing inside Neuralink was invisible to the outside world, but I felt it in every interaction, every meeting, every carefully worded email. Richard had mastered the art of corporate assassination, death by 1,000 cuts, each one too small to protest without seeming paranoid. "Emily, we need to talk about resource allocation," he said one Tuesday morning, his voice carrying that false concern I'd grown to despise. "Your team is requesting significant computational resources for the new diagnostic module, but frankly, we need to prioritize features that can ship this quarter." "The diagnostic module is why investors backed us," I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's the breakthrough that separates us from every other medical AI company." "Was," he corrected, sliding a tablet across the mahogany table. "Was why they backed us. Now they want growth metrics, user acquisition, revenue. Your module won't be market ready for another year. Because innovation takes time. Time we don't have." His interruption was sharp, final. "The board agrees. We're reallocating your team to support the sales platform integration." I stared at him. This man who couldn't debug a simple Python script. telling me how to prioritize my own technology. In my mind, I screamed. In reality, I nodded, another piece of my soul chipping away. The board meetings became theatrical performances where I was relegated to a supporting role. Richard would present my team's work as his strategic victories, using phrases like, under my direction, and my vision for the technology. The board members, venture capitalists who measured success in exit multiples, would nod approvingly while I sat silently. My jaw clenched so tight I'd later taste blood. Then came the whispers about the acquisition. Global Tech Industries, a healthcare conglomerate with deep pockets and shallow innovation. $330 million. The number floated through the offices like a ghost, haunting every conversation. Richard's eyes gleamed with barely concealed greed whenever someone mentioned it. This could be huge for everyone, he announced during an all-hands meeting, his gesture encompassing the room but his eyes avoiding mine. Stock options will vest accelerated. Early employees will see significant returns. He failed to mention that my founder's equity had been diluted through successive funding rounds he'd orchestrated, each one mysteriously requiring restructuring for investor confidence. My personal life became collateral damage. Marcus, my boyfriend of 3 years, grew tired of canceled dinners and weekend work sessions. You're obsessed, he said one night, his suitcase already packed. Not with the technology anymore, but with the fight. You've become someone I don't recognize. They're stealing everything I built, I whispered. But he was already gone, leaving me alone in an apartment that felt as cold and foreign as my own company. I started documenting everything: emails, meeting recordings, decision trails. My laptop became a repository of evidence, though evidence of what, I wasn't sure. Corporate betrayal isn't illegal, it's just business. The isolation was deliberate and effective. Technical discussions moved to separate Slack channels I wasn't invited to. Strategic planning sessions were scheduled during my conflicts that didn't exist until Richard created them. Even my key engineers started avoiding eye contact, torn between loyalty to me and fear of Richard's growing power. You seem stressed, Richard observed one afternoon, cornering me by the elevator. Maybe you should take some time off. Mental health is so important, especially for someone carrying such a heavy technical burden. The threat was wrapped in concern, but I heard it clearly: disappear voluntarily, or be disappeared. I smiled, the expression feeling like broken glass on my face. I'm fine, Richard, never better. But I wasn't fine. I was watching my life's work being packaged for sale. My innovations reduced to line items on a term sheet. The company I'd birthed in late-night coding sessions and caffeine-fueled breakthroughs was being dressed up like a prize cow for auction. And I was being positioned as the farmer who'd become too attached to sell. That night, I sat in my lab, my former lab since I'd been locked out of the new one, and pulled up the original patent filings. My name stared back at me from every document. Emily Carter, inventor, not Neuralink Dynamics, not Richard Hale. Me. A plan began forming in my mind, desperate and dangerous. If they wanted to play corporate games, I'd remind them that in the world of intellectual property, the inventor holds cards they never knew existed. The morning of my execution arrived dressed as a routine Tuesday. I should have seen it coming. Richard had been unusually pleasant the previous week, even complimenting my presentation to the technical advisory board. In corporate warfare, kindness is often the prelude to a killing blow. Emily, could you join us in the boardroom? Richard's assistant messaged me at 9:47 a.m. No context, no agenda. Just those 7 words that made my stomach drop. I walked those marble floors one last time as Chief Technology Officer, my heels clicking a funeral march. The boardroom's glass doors revealed a scene I'd replayed in my nightmares. Richard at the head of the table, flanked by our Chief Legal Officer and the head of HR. No board members present. They didn't need witnesses for this execution. Emily, please sit. Richard gestured to the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd first pitched the technology that built this company. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed too bright, too cheerful for what was about to happen. The HR director, a woman whose name I'd never bothered to learn, slid a folder across the table. "This is a difficult conversation," she began, her voice professionally sympathetic, like a funeral director who'd said these words 1,000 times. Richard cut through the pretense. "Emily, Neuralink has evolved beyond its startup phase. We need leadership that understands the complexities of a potential acquisition, the nuances of enterprise sales, the demands of scaling a global organization. You mean you need someone who won't question you selling our technology to the highest bidder?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. His jaw tightened. "The board has lost confidence in your ability to lead the technical division through this transition. Effective immediately. Your employment with Neuralink Dynamics is terminated." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Terminated, not transitioned, not restructured, terminated. "Your equity vests according to the original agreement," the legal officer added quickly. "Though any unvested shares are forfeited, your company access has been revoked. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." "Security?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I built this company's entire technical infrastructure. I wrote the first 1,000,000 lines of code. And you're having security escort me out like I'm a criminal?" "It's standard procedure," HR woman said, not meeting my eyes. Richard leaned forward, his mask finally slipping. "You were always too attached to the technology, Emily. Too protective. Business requires flexibility, compromise, things you were never capable of understanding." I stood, my legs surprisingly stable. "You're right, Richard. I don't understand your kind of business. The kind where you steal someone's life work and call it a strategic transition." 2 security guards materialized at the door. When had we even hired security? They flanked me as I walked to my office, watching as I placed my personal items in a cardboard box. A cliché so perfect it hurt. My diplomas, a photo from our first product launch, the coffee mug with a recursive function joke only programmers would understand. They watched me like I might steal something, not understanding I'd already created everything worth stealing. The walk to the parking garage stretched infinitely. Employees averted their eyes as I passed, words spreading through Slack faster than I could walk. The technical team looked stricken, the sales team looked relieved, everyone looked afraid. The security guards stood at the garage entrance as I loaded the box into my Tesla, their job complete. I sat in the driver's seat, key fob in hand, and felt the weight of what had just happened crash over me. 8 years of my life reduced to a box of personal effects and a non-compete agreement. I started to cry, huge, gasping sobs that echoed through the empty garage. Not gentle tears of sadness, but violent waves of rage and humiliation. My phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues, variations of, "I'm so sorry," and "This is fucked up," but I couldn't respond. What was there to say? Then, through the tears, a memory surfaced, something my patent attorney had said years ago. Always maintain individual ownership of core IP when possible. You never know when corporate interests might diverge from your own. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my archived emails until I found it. The IP assignment agreement from Neuralinks Incorporation. There, in Section 7, Subsection 3, a clause I'd insisted on despite the investors' protests. Patent holder retains veto rights over any transfer, sale, or licensing of individually held intellectual property. My tears stopped. In their place, something cold and sharp crystallized. Richard thought he'd fired an employee. He'd actually armed a weapon. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of legal documents and bitter coffee. I'd transformed my dining room into a war room. Papers spread across every surface. Laptop screens glowing with patent filings and contract clauses. My appearance in the mirror shocked me. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, yesterday's clothes. But I didn't care. I wasn't preparing for a beauty contest. I was preparing for war. "You're absolutely certain about this?" David Steinberg, my patent attorney, sat across from me, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. He'd driven down from his Boulder office after my frantic call, bringing with him 2 decades of IP litigation experience and a box of legal precedents. "Show me the clause again," I demanded, though I'd already memorized every word. He highlighted the text on his tablet. "Transfer of patent rights requires explicit written consent from the named inventor for any transaction exceeding $10 million in value or involving change of corporate control. And this is enforceable?" Ironclad. "You insisted on this language despite 3 rounds of investor pushback. Remember? You said that my ideas weren't currency to be traded without my consent." I finished, remembering that battle with the Series A investors. They'd called me paranoid. Turns out, I wasn't paranoid enough. David pulled up Neuralink's patent portfolio. 7 core patents in your name personally, not assigned to the company. They're licensing them from you under the technology transfer agreement. Without these, he shook his head. Their AI is basically an expensive calculator. The diagnostic algorithms, the neural network architecture, the predictive modeling. It's all yours. I stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Denver's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent to my personal catastrophe. What's my exposure if I refuse the transfer? Legally, none. They can't force you to sign, practically. They'll probably sue for bad faith, interference with business operations, whatever they can throw at you. But Emily, he leaned forward. They need your signature more than you need their goodwill. Without your IP, global tech walks. No acquirer will touch a company with contested core technology. The deal's supposed to close next week. Friday. 5 days from now. David pulled up his phone, scrolling through tech news. They've already leaked it to TechCrunch. Global Tech set to acquire Neuralink Dynamics for $330 million. Richards quoted extensively, calling it a transformative merger that will revolutionize healthcare AI. I read Richards' quotes, each word stoking the fire in my chest. Not one mention of my name. The technology I'd created was attributed to Neuralink's innovative team and collective brilliance. He'd erased me from my own story. I want to exercise the veto, I said quietly. David was silent for a moment. You understand what this means? You'll burn every bridge. The investors will lose their minds. Richard will. Richard made it personal when he had security escort me out like a criminal. My voice hardened. When he stood in board meetings taking credit for my work. When he planned this acquisition knowing he'd fire me before it closed. You could negotiate, demand a better package, consulting fees, ongoing royalties. No. The word came out sharp, final. They want to play corporate hardball? Fine. But they forgot one thing. Without my consent, their $330 million deal is worth exactly nothing. David studied me, then slowly smiled. You know, in 20 years of practice, I've seen a lot of founders get screwed over. It's rare to see one who can screw back. He pulled out his laptop. We'll need to formally notify them of your position. I suggest we wait until Thursday afternoon. Give them minimum time to maneuver. No, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. We don't notify them at all. Let them find out when I show up at the closing. Emily, that's brutal. That's the point. I spent the remaining days preparing, not just legally, but emotionally. I knew what I was about to do would make me a pariah in Denver's tech scene. The woman who killed a $330 million deal out of spite, but they'd taken everything else from me, my company, my team, my reputation. The only thing I had left was my signature, and I'd be damned if I'd give them that too. I bought a new suit for the occasion, black, perfectly tailored, the kind of outfit that said I meant business. I had my hair professionally styled, my nails done in blood red. If I was going to commit corporate murder, I was going to look impeccable doing it. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining Richard's face when he realized what was happening. The investors' panic, the global tech executives' fury. By morning, I'd replayed the scenario 100 times, each iteration more satisfying than the last. This wasn't just revenge, this was justice, served at exactly the right temperature, ice cold. Friday arrived wrapped in perfect Colorado sunshine, the kind of crisp morning that made Denver feel like the promised land. I sat in my car outside Global Tech's gleaming downtown tower, watching executives stream through the revolving doors. My phone showed 8:47 a.m. The closing was scheduled for 9. David sat beside me, briefcase in his lap, fingers drumming nervously. You can still back out, negotiate, take a settlement. David. I turned to him, my voice steady as steel. They had security escort me out. Today, I returned the favor. We walked through the marble lobby, my heels announcing each step with sharp precision. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt both eternal and instant. When the doors opened, I saw them through the glass conference room walls. A tableau of corporate victory. Richard at the center, surrounded by Neuralink's board, global tech executives, and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. Richard was mid-laugh when he saw me. The sound died in his throat. His face cycled through confusion, anger, then something that looked deliciously like fear. I pushed open the glass door. Good morning, everyone. I believe you're trying to sell my technology. Emily, what the hell are you doing here? Richard stood, his composure cracking. Security is unnecessary, interrupted Global Tech's CEO, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Morrison. Dr. Carter, I presume. Richard told us you'd left the company. Oh, I was terminated. Tuesday morning, rather unceremoniously, actually. I smiled, taking an empty seat at the table. But my patents didn't leave with me. The lead counsel for Global Tech, a man who looked like he'd been born in a three-piece suit, frowned. The IP transfer agreements should have been completed weeks ago. Should have been, I agreed, but weren't. You see, there's a small detail Richard overlooked in his eagerness to cash out. The 7 core patents that make Neuralink's AI actually work, they're mine. Personally. Licensed to Neuralink under very specific terms. I pulled out my phone, projecting the agreement onto the conference room screen. Section 7, subsection 3. Patent holder retains veto rights over any transfer, sale, or licensing in transactions exceeding $10 million. The room erupted. Lawyers grabbed documents. Global tech executives huddled in heated whispers. Board members stared at Richard with undisguised fury. This is ridiculous. Richard's voice pitched higher, desperate. She's a disgruntled former employee trying to sabotage. I'm the inventor whose technology you're trying to sell without permission, I corrected. And I'm here to formally notify you that I do not consent to this transfer. Patricia Morrison raised a hand, silencing the chaos. Dr. Carter, what exactly do you want? Want? I stood, gathering my composure like armor. 3 days ago, I wanted to continue building the technology that could save lives. I wanted to lead the team I'd assembled. I wanted to be treated as more than an inconvenient technicality in Richard's grand exit strategy. I looked directly at Richard. But you made it clear I was disposable. A problem to be solved before the sale. So now, what I want is simple. I want you to understand that without me, you have nothing to sell. We'll sue you into the ground, Richard snarled, his mask completely gone. Breach of contract. Bad faith negotiations. Go ahead, David interjected smoothly. We'll countersue for wrongful termination, IP theft, and defamation. Discovery should be fascinating. I'm particularly interested in emails discussing Dr. Carter's planned termination before the acquisition. Patricia Morrison stood slowly. This deal is dead. Her words fell like bombs in the silent room. Global Tech won't acquire contested IP. Richard, you assured us the technology transfer was clean. It is. She's just being vindictive. Vindictive? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. You conspired to fire me before a major acquisition, tried to sell my life's work without my consent, and had me escorted out by security like a common thief. If this is vindictive, it's a vindication I've earned. The board members were already packing their documents, their faces masks of barely contained rage, not at me, but at Richard. $330 million had just evaporated because of his arrogance. "You've destroyed everything," Richard whispered, his face pale. "No," I replied, walking toward the door. "I've simply refused to let you steal it. There's a difference." As David and I reached the exit, I turned back one final time. "Oh, and Richard, the next time you try to build a company on someone else's brilliance, maybe don't fire them before the check clears." The elevator doors closed on the most beautiful chaos I'd ever created. The aftermath hit like an avalanche. Within 2 hours, TechCrunch had updated their headline: "Global Tech walks away from 380 Windfeed Neuralink acquisition after IP dispute." By noon, it was the top story on Hacker News, Reddit's technology forums, and every startup Slack channel in Denver. My phone exploded with notifications until I simply turned it off. The first domino fell Monday morning. Richard was removed as CEO via emergency board meeting held over Zoom. I heard about it from a former colleague who texted me, "They didn't even let him in the building. Security packed his office. Karma is beautiful." The second domino was the investors. 3 venture capital firms issued a joint statement expressing deep concern about governance failures and due diligence oversights. Translation: heads would roll. The partner who'd championed Richard's hiring quietly announced his retirement to pursue other opportunities. By Wednesday, the lawsuits started. Shareholders sued the board for fiduciary negligence. The board sued Richard for misrepresentation. Richard tried to sue me for tortious interference, but no lawyer would take the case after reviewing the contracts. Global Tech sued Neuralink for breach of contract and expense reimbursement. It was a circular firing squad of litigation that would keep attorneys busy for years. The media painted me as either a hero or villain, depending on the publication. Female founder stands up to corporate theft, competed with vindictive engineer destroys $330 million deal. Bloomberg called me the woman who weaponized IP law. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece titled "When Founders Fight Back, the Neuralink Implosion." But the real vindication came Thursday afternoon when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Dr. Carter, this is Patricia Morrison from Global Tech." I almost dropped my coffee. "Ms. Morrison, I'll be direct. We're still interested in the technology, the real technology, your technology. But we want to deal with the actual inventor, not corporate middlemen who don't understand what they're selling." "I'm listening. We'd like to license your patents directly. You maintain ownership. We get usage rights for our medical platforms. 5-year agreement, renewable. With you as technical consultant to ensure proper implementation." The number she quoted made my hands shake. Not $330 million, but enough to ensure I'd never have to answer to another Richard Hale again. "I'll need to review with my attorney," I managed. "Of course, Dr. Carter." For what it's worth, Richard is an idiot. Anyone who'd throw away talent like yours deserves what happened to them. Neuralink itself entered a death spiral. Without my patents, they were just another AI company with nice offices and no differentiating technology. The board desperately tried to rehire me. They even offered me the CEO position. I declined with a 2-word email, "Not interested." 3 months later, Neuralink officially shut down. The employees scattered to other startups, many reaching out to me for recommendations. I helped every engineer who'd been kind to me, wrote glowing references for the researchers who'd respected the work. For Richard's sales team and the executives who'd supported him, silence. Richard himself became toxic in the tech community. His LinkedIn updates grew increasingly desperate, seeking new opportunities to leverage my executive experience. The same people who'd laughed at his jokes and praised his vision now wouldn't return his calls. Last I heard, he was teaching entrepreneurship and leadership at a community college in Arizona. The patent attorney who'd helped me, David, said something that stuck with me. "You know, most founders who get pushed out just disappear quietly. They take their severance and sign their non-disparagement agreements. You burned it all down instead." "They didn't offer me severance," I reminded him. They offered me humiliation. And you offered them destruction in return. No, I corrected. I offered them nothing. Literally nothing. That's all they deserved. The global tech deal closed 6 months later. My patents licensed. My consulting agreement signed. My bank account finally reflecting the value of what I'd created. I incorporated a new company, just me and two brilliant engineers who'd left Neuralink in solidarity. We worked on what mattered, technology that could actually save lives, not just make VCs rich. The Denver tech scene still whispered about the Neuralink incident at networking events and startup meetups. I became a cautionary tale told from different angles, to founders about protecting their IP, to investors about due diligence, to CEOs about the danger of underestimating technical talent. But I didn't care about being a cautionary tale. I'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. They'd tried to erase me from my own story. And instead, I'd become the only part anyone remembered. A year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in downtown Denver, 30 floors up, watching the city lights flicker like electronic constellations. The space was everything my old life wasn't: minimalist, peaceful, entirely mine. No corporate art, no motivational posters, no ping-pong tables masquerading as culture. Just clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the quiet hum of servers in my home office running simulations that would become tomorrow's breakthroughs. The champagne in my hand was real this time, Dom Perignon, not the cheap stuff we'd celebrated with in Neuralink's early days. But I was drinking it alone, and somehow that felt right. This wasn't a victory that needed witnesses. My phone buzzed with a notification from my new company's Slack. One of my engineers had just cracked a problem we'd been working on for months: a diagnostic algorithm that could detect pancreatic cancer 2 years earlier than current methods. Real innovation, real impact. No board meetings required. I thought about Richard sometimes, the way you might think about a bad dream that taught you to lock your doors. He'd sent me an email 6 months after everything collapsed, a rambling mess of accusations and self-pity, ending with, "You destroyed my life." I'd deleted it without responding. He still didn't understand. I hadn't destroyed his life. I'd simply refused to let him steal mine. The global tech partnership had exceeded every projection. Patricia Morrison became something of a mentor, introducing me to other industry leaders who valued innovation over intimidation. "You know what I respect most about you?" she'd said over dinner last week. "You didn't just survive being pushed out, you made them regret it." But standing there, looking out at Denver's skyline, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me through those dark weeks after being fired had transformed into something else: purpose. Clean. Clear purpose, untainted by corporate politics or venture capital velocity. My new company would never go public, would never have a board that could fire me, would never prioritize exit strategies over innovation. We'd already turned down 3 acquisition offers, and we'd turn down 30 more if needed. The patents were mine, the company was mine, the decisions were mine. I'd learned the hard way that control wasn't about equity percentages or board seats. It was about owning what you create. There were no employee badges at my company, no security guards, no hierarchical org charts or executive parking spaces. Just brilliant people doing brilliant work, compensated fairly, treated respectfully. Everything Neuralink claimed to be in its recruiting pitches but never actually was. Sometimes young founders reached out, having heard my story, asking for advice. I always told them the same thing. Your ideas are not community property. Your innovations are not collective assets. And your worth is not determined by people who can't understand what you've built. The city below pulsed with ambition. Thousands of startups, millions of dreams, billions in venture capital flowing through glass towers. Somewhere down there, another founder was probably being told they were too technical to lead their own company. Another inventor was being squeezed out before an acquisition. Another Emily Carter was having security escort her to the parking garage. To them, I was proof that you could fight back, that David could beat Goliath if David held the patents. That sometimes, the best revenge isn't living well, It's refusing to sign on the dotted line. I raised my champagne glass to my reflection in the window, to the woman who'd been called vindictive, destructive, difficult, all accurate, all earned, all worth it. They wanted to erase me from my own story, I said to the night air, the words visible in the cold as small clouds of breath. But in the end, I became the only chapter anyone remembers. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent and eternal. I turned back to my apartment, to my servers, to my work. There were still diseases to detect, algorithms to perfect, lives to save. The real work, the work that mattered. They'd taken my company, but I'd kept my crown. And in the kingdom of intellectual property, the inventor holds the keys. No board can vote on that. No CEO can restructure it. No security guard can escort it to the parking garage. It was mine. And that, more than the money, more than the vindication, more than watching Richard's empire crumble, that was the victory. I was Emily Carter. I held the patents. And I'd never sign them away again. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you listening to this from? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're in. I'd love to connect with fellow dreamers and fighters who understand that sometimes standing your ground is the only option. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Let's discuss in the comments below.